People always ask me if I believe in the supernatural. The truth is, I never used to. For most of my life, I was the kind of person who needed evidence. Ghost stories, strange encounters, haunted places. I always assumed there was a logical explanation. But a few years ago, something happened that completely shattered that belief. Even now, I still struggle to explain it. My boyfriend's family owned a beautiful house far out in the countryside. The property stretched for what felt like forever. If you walked out the back door and kept going, you'd still be on their land long after the house had disappeared behind you. His parents were leaving town for the weekend, and he invited me to stay over so we could have the place to ourselves. I remember joking that the house felt creepy. It wasn't the house itself. It was a silence. Out there, the world felt empty. No traffic, no neighbors, no city lights. Just endless darkness pressing against the windows. At first, those thoughts faded away. He cooked dinner, opened my favorite bottle of wine, and we spent the evening laughing and playing cards. Eventually, we settled into the living room and put on a movie. Sometime around 1 a.m, we both fell asleep. Then we heard it. The sound exploded through the house so violently that it ripped us awake. I clamped my hands over my ears. The floor vibrated beneath us. The dishes inside the china cabinet rattled. The windows seemed to hum with the force of it. For one horrifying second, I thought the entire house was collapsing. The closest thing I can compare it to is a ship's horn. But deeper, louder, wrong. The noise lasted only a few seconds before everything went silent again. We stared at each other. Neither of us had any idea what had just happened. He turned off the television and walked toward the massive bay window that overlooked the dark field behind the house. Nothing. No headlights. No storm. No movement. I joined him, pressing my face against the glass and searching the darkness. Then the backyard lit up. A blinding white flash burst across the property, brighter than lightning, flooding the entire room with light. We jumped back to the window. Nothing. There was absolutely nothing outside. The uneasy feeling that had been sitting quietly in the back of my mind suddenly became pure fear. He switched off every light in the house. I hated the idea of sitting in total darkness, but he insisted it would help us see outside. We moved into the kitchen and stared through the side windows. That's when we saw another light. Not a flash, a glow. It came from somewhere behind the house. We rushed back to the living room and noticed that the backyard floodlight had turned itself on. My boyfriend's face went pale. He told me that shouldn't have happened. According to him, the motion sensor wouldn't activate for something small. I asked if he was trying to scare me. He didn't answer. Then we heard it. At first, it sounded like whispering. Soft, low, constant. But the more I listened, the more I realized it wasn't a language I had ever heard before. It was like dozens of voices mumbling together. I looked at him. Someone is out there. He didn't respond. He simply pointed toward the side window. Two shadows drifted past the glass. Not walked, drifted. Their movements were unnatural, almost as if they were swaying instead of taking steps. I told him to call the police. He pulled out his phone. No signal. No Wi-Fi. I grabbed mine. Nothing. The whispering grew louder. Then we heard the kitchen door handle move. Something was trying to get inside. I knew he had locked that door earlier. I started screaming. The noise stopped. The two shadows remained standing outside, completely still. The whispering returned. My boyfriend yelled that he had a gun and ordered whoever was outside to leave. It was a bluff. But before anything else could happen, that impossible horn blasted through the night again. The sound shook the house. We covered our ears and screamed. When it finally stopped, we looked toward the door. The shadows were gone. Another blinding flash illuminated the yard. At the exact same moment, both of our phones erupted with notifications. The signal had returned. Then both the front door and the side door flew open. Locked doors, opening by themselves. I expected something to rush inside. Nothing did. He slammed the doors shut while I called the police. When officers finally arrived, they searched the property but found nothing. The yard was muddy, yet there wasn't a single footprint anywhere. No evidence. No intruders. No explanation. We stayed awake until sunrise. Nothing else happened. According to his family, nothing like it ever happened there again. But I know what I saw. I know what I heard. And sometimes, late at night, I still hear that impossible horn echoing in my dreams. I didn't tell many people about that experience. Not because I was afraid they would laugh, because I was afraid they might believe me. A year later, after a painful breakup, I moved into my parents' old lakeside camp house. It sat alone on the edge of a massive lake, abandoned for most of the year. It was quiet, peaceful, just me and my black lab, Zemo. For weeks, everything was perfect. Then one night, Zemo refused to go outside. He stood by the door crying. I stepped outside myself, and that's when I saw them. Tiny balls of light floating over the distant horizon. They moved in ways that made no sense. They darted across the sky, stopped instantly, changed direction without slowing down. At first, I thought they had to be drones, but there were too many of them, and somehow, I knew they were watching me. I stood there in the darkness, staring at those impossible lights. For several minutes they floated silently above the lake, never moving closer, never drifting farther away. They simply hovered there, as though they were waiting. Then, without warning, they were gone, not fading, not flying away. They shot straight upward into the night sky with impossible speed and vanished. The moment they disappeared, Zemo finally stepped outside as if nothing had happened. His tail wagged. He sniffed around the yard. Whatever had terrified him was gone. I wish I could say I forgot about it. I didn't. That night, lying in bed, I couldn't stop replaying the image in my mind. I searched the internet for hours, looking for videos or explanations. I found stories about strange lights, strange sightings, and things that people swore they had seen. None of them matched what I had witnessed. The next morning, I called my father. He had spent years around that lake and knew every inch of it. I asked him if he had ever seen lights moving across the water. He laughed at first. Then he realized I wasn't joking. He told me he had seen shooting stars and strange weather over the years, but nothing like what I was describing. After we hung up, I convinced myself it had to be some rare natural phenomenon. That lie lasted exactly one day. The following night, almost at the exact same time, Zemo began crying at the back door. I rushed outside. The lights had returned. This time they were different. The night before, they had stayed low on the horizon. Now they looked closer, much closer. A cold feeling settled into my chest. I couldn't explain it, but every instinct in my body was screaming that something wasn't right. Some of the lights suddenly shot upward and disappeared into the darkness. The others remained. They hovered silently over the water, blinking softly. Then they began moving together. Slowly, deliberately, one by one, the separate lights drifted toward each other until they merged into a single glowing sphere. I watched in complete disbelief. Nothing in nature behaved like this. Nothing. The giant orb hung over the lake for several seconds before slowly descending. I couldn't tell if it sank beneath the water or simply disappeared beyond the horizon. Either way, it was gone. And once again, my dog acted as though nothing had happened. I didn't sleep that night. I sat by the window until sunrise, waiting for the lights to come back. The next day I searched every website and forum I could find. The people telling stories like mine were the same people I used to make fun of. Conspiracy theorists, UFO hunters, people I thought had lost touch with reality. Now I wasn't so sure. On the third night, I almost packed my things and left. But curiosity won. A part of me needed to see them one more time. At exactly the same hour, they appeared, not from the horizon, not from behind the trees. They simply existed. 1 second the sky was empty. The next second they were there, floating, watching. This time they moved differently. Instead of darting across the sky, they took turns moving. One light would glide forward while all the others stayed perfectly still. Then another would move, and another. After several minutes, I realized what they were doing. They were coming toward the shore, toward me. As they drew closer, I heard a low humming sound. It reminded me of old fluorescent lights, but deeper, almost alive. Soon they were close enough for me to see them clearly. They weren't aircraft. They weren't drones. They looked exactly like glowing spheres hanging in the air. My heart started pounding. When they reached the dock, I backed into the house and locked the sliding glass door. I couldn't look away. The lights floated into the backyard. Then chaos erupted. They shot in every direction at impossible speed. One streaked through the trees. Another slammed toward the house. Others dove into the water before exploding back into the sky. It looked as though the entire property was under attack. I dropped to the floor beside my dog and squeezed my eyes shut. I waited for the windows to shatter, for the walls to collapse, for something to come through that door. Then, silence. I opened my eyes. Zemo had stopped crying. I looked outside. The lights were gone. The yard was untouched. The trees stood exactly where they had before. The house wasn't damaged. It was as if nothing had ever happened. The following night, the lights never returned. Neither did they appear for the rest of the time I lived there. I told a few close friends. None of them believed me. One thought I had dreamed it. Another thought I had imagined the entire thing. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was losing my mind. But I know what I saw. 3 nights. The same lights. The same impossible movements. And every time they appeared, my dog knew they were coming long before I did. To this day, I have no explanation. And sometimes, when I think back to those nights, I wonder if the lights ever really left, or if they simply found someone else to watch. The next story I'm about to tell is even harder for me to explain. It happened roughly 10 years ago during a cross-country trip with my family. We traveled in an old RV that I inherited from my father. It was me, my wife, Rachel, and our 2 children. One summer, we stopped at a remote campground surrounded by endless forests and mountains. During the day, it was beautiful. At night, it felt ancient. I had one bad habit back then. I smoked. After everyone went to sleep, I would sneak away from the RV and walk deep into the woods to a quiet overlook where I could sit alone. One night, while I was sitting there in complete silence, I heard a strange sound. It wasn't an animal. It wasn't the wind. It was a slow, pulsing noise, almost like someone whispering the word while over and over again in the darkness. Curiosity got the better of me. I stood up and followed it. The deeper I walked into the forest, the louder it became. Then, it stopped. At the exact same moment, every other sound disappeared too. The wind, the insects, the leaves, the entire forest had gone silent. I stood frozen. Then I heard something move behind me. I turned. About 10 feet away stood a figure. Tall, thin, perfectly still. At first I convinced myself it had to be another camper. But when I shifted my weight ever so slightly, the figure flinched. And in that instant, I realized something was standing there, watching me.